2 Samuel 2, 1 through 4. And it came to pass after that David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, Go up. And David said, Whither shall I go up? And he said, Unto Hebron. Now, this is after Saul died. This is what it's referring to after these things came to pass. Saul died. The guy came to David. Came to David trying to win favor over him. And then David, being a righteous man, following after the Lord, knew that this man did what was even wrong. And in most kingdoms, you gotta understand what this man did. He would have been honored because of it. But David was somebody who seeked after the Lord. So because of that, he was much different than any other king of any other time, because he was seeking God and recognized God as Lord. He was just put in a place by God, is the way David saw it. And because of that, he knew that what this man did shouldn't go unpunished, definitely shouldn't have been rewarded. So he had this man punished for bragging that he killed Saul, even though we know from 1 Kings that Saul fell on his sword, and this guy probably just picked up stuff that was left at the battlefield. So at this point, both Jonathan and Saul are dead, and David's been anointed by Samuel before Samuel died. So he's been anointed for years. People are looking to David for leadership, and have been, because of the Lord being with him, which was one of the things that caused division between him and Saul, was the fact that people looked to David as a leader. So there's people that's already accepted him as king now that Saul's dead. So now he's looking at a place where God wants him to set up the kingdom. And so God tells him Hebron. It's important David doesn't decide where it's going to be. He prays to God and lets God tell him. This shows that his kingdom that's being set up is not being led by David, but David's just being used to let the Lord lead through him. And we as Christians make decisions, we need to make sure we consult the Lord on it, pray to the Lord, ask the Lord what He wants to do. Oftentimes, we forget that part, and then things end up going in a negative way because of it, when God would have just told us what to do, and things would have went His plan. Now, the capital would move later, but at this point they're in Hebron. So David went up thither, and his two wives also, Ebony the Jezreelite, and Abigail, Nabal's wife, the Carmelite. So I think it's in, I don't know where it is, but it tells the story of Abigail. What happened was David, being a soldier, went to warn this man, and Nabal was all angry and bitter and didn't listen to warning, and then he ended up dying. So David took Abigail as his wife because she was the one warning and making David aware of what was going on. So, but either way, he's been given God's direction, and he moves his family to where God says to do. Oftentimes, some of us are willing to serve God up until it causes us an inconvenience. You know, Abraham journeyed from where he knew to a land where he didn't even know for sure where God was taking him. But he had faith to make that journey. We got to just trust God where He's leading us. Now, David knew where he's going, but it required him leaving where he was. And oftentimes we're going to be not going to be able to move about in faith growing unless we move where God wants us to. We're going to stay dormant and even backslide if we don't move where He was wanting us to. And it ain't always easy moves. Sometimes it's hard moves we make, but He's there with us, guiding us. Now for David, I believe this would probably been an easier move, because David being a soldier, he's been traveling about. The fact that he's settled down in a place kind of shows that he won't be traveling as much, running from Saul. He can settle down. But oftentimes it ain't easiest choice to do, move in God's leadership, because it takes faith. Oftentimes we don't know what's going to happen when we get there, and necessarily where He's taking us from there. We're just to follow Him regardless. And his men that were with him did David bring up, every man with his household, and they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. So those under his command, direct under his command, those that have been by his side the entire time, he brings up there, and his family. So he moves because God tells him to. He doesn't just go visit and be like, well, God's going to change His mind. He directly relocates, and God calls us to do that sometimes. Sometimes He closes the door when we move so we don't go back. With Israel, when they left Egypt, God made it to where they could not go back. Regardless of what they're saying, they could not have gone back. They could have went elsewhere outside God's leadership, but they could not have went back to Egypt. David could have went back to Bethlehem. And he knows that. He knows he could have stayed there, but he's planting himself where God told him to. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying that the men of Jabesh Gilead were they that buried Saul. So David follows in God's command, and now he's anointed by the people. We see how earlier as a child he was anointed, or a teenager, he was anointed by Samuel. God's spokesman, God's prophet, he's anointed by him. So now he's not only just recognized by God, but he has the honor of having people recognize him as king, which is very important to being a king. If you're made king by God, but nobody's under your kingdom, it didn't really do much good. This, at this point, seals David being a king, at least of Judah. It would take a little longer to become king of all 12 tribes, but now he's king of Judah. And this is finally, after years of service and following God, David's finally seeing that God's promises that He promised him is starting to happen and come unfold, starting to be fulfilled. David, I also believe, being a man of faith, knew that God's plan wasn't done with him just being king of Judah. And then here we see at the end of the verse that David's left with a decision to make. He's told who buried Saul. So at this point, people are probably that anointed him king are expecting him to do something about this. These were the men that buried the guy who sought after his life, the last king. In most traditions, if a new king line would have came in, they would have did everything to desecrate the old king to exalt themselves up. So some of the people probably would have been expecting David to do such thing. So David's left, and we'll cover that again later, but David's left wondering and with the decision of how he is to deal with these people. Because doing it one way would have seen that he is ruthless and people would have stayed in line. But being generous would have showed that he is a generous king, but it would have also showed people maybe they could get out of line, maybe they could take advantage of him. So it's a very important decision how he reacted towards this.